Working together to make a better community. We can create a brighter day.
Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Michael Dick, the executive producer of CBC Thunder Bay. But before I turn to Michael, I just want to give a shout out to our veterans. We're taping the show just before Remembrance Day, and we put aside a day to remember and recognize the sacrifices they've served. But I also want to put out a challenge because we haven't always done as good as we can in terms of supporting our veterans, especially when they come back with a disability. And that's our challenge to do better in the future. So now, coming back to our guest, Michael, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for making time for me, because I know we've been playing tag trying to meet up, but this has been great, so thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about your own history. Are you a Thunder Bay boy, or?
I'm proud Thunder Bay boy, actually. Born and raised in Port Arthur, and a proud member of Fort William First Nation. Went to C.D. Howe, and then went to Hammarskjöld High School, and then left to go to university, and then start my career with CBC. And 4 years ago, I had the opportunity to come back to Thunder Bay and come back home, and I snapped up the opportunity, and so here I am, the place I never thought I'd be back, Thunder Bay.
So where have you been with CBC before you came back home?
So I started my career as a TV reporter in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and I was there for about 2 years, and then I moved to Toronto, where I worked on the local Toronto show. And then I moved to the National for a bit, and I was the weekend national reporter for CBC TV. And then I moved to Edmonton for a year, and then I went back to Halifax to work 2.5 years. Then an opportunity came up in 2013 to take a job with CBC in Japan. So I lived in Tokyo for 2 years, working with our equivalent, the CBC equivalent, which is called NHK. And then there I worked as a correspondent with CBC while working with NHK. And then 4 years ago, this opportunity came up to lead the station and become the executive producer here. And so here I am back in the land of the sleeping giant.
Well, it's great, and we're glad you're back, and you bring now all this experience from all across the country working with CBC.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the CBC. You've seen it from a number of angles, and now you're kind of a manager guy there. I'm a big fan of CBC, and I'm a big fan of public broadcasting. So I'll share that right up front. But tell us a little bit about CBC.
Well, CBC has been around for 83 years. Just a few weeks ago, prior to this taping, it celebrated its 83rd birthday, and it's a great organization to work for. There are thousands of people in French and English who work in stations from coast to coast to coast. Who strive to do public broadcasting and to tell stories of Canadians, whether it's in Nunavut or whether it's in BC or on the East Coast. So. It's a great organization that has lots of pride in who it is and what it stands for. And I've been lucky enough to work in, I think, 6 or 7 CBC locations. They're all unique. They're all different. They all have different stories and priorities. But I can tell you that they're all strive for balance and accuracy and to be part of their community, just as we do here in Thunder Bay. We want to be part of the community and be proud. So, CBC has been good to me, and it's been... I wear the CBC logo very proud because it's a great organization and it's one that I think Canadians hold very close to them.
So, as a public broadcaster, it gets revenue both from the state, from the government, but it also generates their own revenue as well.
I believe so, yes. I'm not a numbers guy, but I don't ever profess to be. But obviously there is revenue from ads, and all that money goes back into programming and to news coverage and to maintaining stations like the one here in Thunder Bay. There's stations that have hundreds of people working in them, and like Toronto, and then there's stations like ours that have 10 to 15 people working in them. So the money goes back into the communities and to telling stories and to being committed and being part of who we are.
So I'd like to explore with you really about how you do that, how you cover our region. It's a big region, Northwestern Ontario.
Very big region.
What is the geographic area for our station here?
So our station, CBC Thunder Bay, which is here on 213 Miles Street, covers an area that is roughly the size of France. So our coverage area goes to the Manitoba border, up to in the north, like Fort Severn area, and then to about White River, Wawa areas where the signals sort of overlap with Sudbury. So the area is vast, and it's some places don't have access to internet. Some of the northern flying communities. So it's a challenge. There are different communities, different time zones, even. So it's a big region with a lot of different priorities and a lot of different stories. So it's always a challenge, but as CBC, we're not just focused on covering Thunder Bay, which is obviously the largest market, but we're also focused on covering like Dryden and Kenora and the northern communities. So it's always a challenge to be part of those communities, be part of that fabric, and define those stories. But that is our mandate, and it's also who we are as an organization. So it's a challenge. Don't get me wrong.
Well, I can imagine, because so much goes on in Northwest Ontario, and so. In terms of kind of the infrastructure, we've got like these broadcast towers that send out the message in different communities.
Yes.
Because there's not like one that reaches everywhere.
Nope, a series of towers all across northwestern Ontario.
And how many towers?
That's a good question. I couldn't give you an exact number, but I can tell you there are many. And they're all maintained through Thunder Bay. I know that we have skidoos in our parking lot sometimes because some of them are so remote that they need to be accessed. And they're everywhere in the region, and unfortunately, this past summer we actually had one of our transmission towers in Pickle Lake burn in the forest fires. So that we lost service for that region, and that that's an important service, especially during a forest fire season. So when those towers go down, I can tell you that people who are paid much more money than me and offices across this country realize that even a community the size of Pickle Lake. It's a priority for CBC to be there, and the process of expediting towers and repairing them moves very quickly, because whether it's a city the size of Toronto or the city or town the size of Pickle Lake, getting the service there matters, and those towers need to be working. So they're a priority, and they are our lifeline, because unlike a lot of different media outlets in the country, we're the only one that goes coast to coast to coast. So you can hear us everywhere. Across this great nation. So the towers are the lifeline.
And so as the executive producer, do you look after that kind of stuff in our area too? Or how broad is your responsibility?
My responsibility is to maintain the building here in Thunder Bay, which is on Miles Street, manage the staff, manage the journalism, and sort of oversee our strategy in terms of what we'll be doing in the future. A lot of the operational stuff in terms of towers is a separate part of CBC. It's a very big organization. So there is a team of people here in Thunder Bay who maintain those towers and are constantly going across the region to make sure that their batteries are working, that there isn't snow on the dishes or stuff like that. So that's a separate part that I don't manage, but I oversee in constant contact with them to make sure that any given morning we can have a person in Dryden say we lost our signal. And so it's my responsibility to make sure that signal gets back. So, but the actual infrastructure of the towers, not me. So I don't want that responsibility.
I hear you. So I'm wondering too now, it's a big responsibility. How does it start to play out? Maybe like on a daily basis.
For me?
Well, for actually the whole staff, for the station.
Sure.
In terms of, how much fits and what do we cover?
Yep. So it really starts. It starts at every day at 9 a.m. we have a story meeting.
You know what? We're gonna have to take a short break.
Good. I'll leave everybody in suspense.
That's right. We're gonna find out all the inside info.
Well
Please
played.
Stay with us. Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis. And my guest today is Michael Dick, the executive producer of CBC Thunder Bay. Welcome back, Michael.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So just before the break, we were kind of looking at how does it really work on a daily basis? How do you decide what you're going to put on air and who's in there and what are they doing?
Well, it's always every day is a different day, I'll tell you that. But the morning show goes on air at 6 a.m. But the next day after the show airs really starts at 9 a.m. and that's when we come together and have a story meeting. We all get around a table. So there's myself who leads the meeting. There's Lisa Lacko, the host. There's MJ Cormier, who's a newsreader. The reporters, Rod Demilay, who's the morning show producer, and then all the other staff are around a table. And so what we do is we obviously have things that we know we need to cover. Say that, for example, the city's putting out a press release that, the mayor is announcing a week to celebrate small business. Well, that's something that's a priority that we'll have to cover. But really, CBC prides itself on original and investigative work, and so our reporters are responsible for coming up with story ideas. They all have different beats. Jeff Walters, for example, will cover things like municipal affairs, the region. So they're always constantly, making contact with people in these different areas and seeing what's happening. So for us, it starts with sort of the things that we know we need to cover, but also what's happening in the region, because we do broadcast to Red Lake, we broadcast to Pekanchicum, so we need to know what's happening in those communities. So reporters, and including myself, are always sort of, checking out what's happening on social media. We're checking out what's happening on Facebook. We're checking with our contacts to see if there's anything that we need to cover or should be covering. So from there, we sort of prioritize our day. And, while we do broadcast radio, digital is a big priority, a major priority, because that reaches a wide audience beyond the hours of radio. So we're thinking about what stories need to go on the website, what stories need to have a treatment on radio. So it's a really, there's never really like an exact science. It's sort of like what needs to be covered and what we should be covering. So throughout the day, we're always constantly looking at the wires, checking with OPP, checking with police to see what's happening, so that we know what's out there and what needs to be covered. And any given day, it could be a different thing. Like today it could be an announcement for funding for the marina. I'm just making this up, but tomorrow it could be breaking news. There could be a community evacuated for a forest fire. So you have to be able to to cover the things that need to be covered, but be also responsive to cover the breaking news, because breaking news happens at any given time, and you need to be ready to do that too. So there's no real science to it, but it's making sure that we're connected to the community and covering the stories that matter in all the communities.
So do you have like an overall plan that says we want to give Thunder Bay 50% of our time and the region 50%, or
no
any kind of parameters that you work from?
No parameters. I mean, obviously, our morning show has to be reflective of the region, because it is heard all across the region. So we're always trying to get the best stories out of Thunder Bay, getting the best interviews from the region. But in our prime slots in the morning, which the morning show, it's that the best story comes out of Red Lake. That's going to be in the best slots, or if the best story is in Kakabeka Falls, we're going to do that. Like, it's about giving the audience the best story of the region, because we're all connected to this community, whether we are we're in White River or whether we're in the Skandiga. So it's about giving the story that matters the most to people that day. So no, there's no 60-40 Northwestern Ontario versus Thunder Bay. It's just about giving the best stories. Sometimes you'll hear our newscast and it'll be 80% stories from the region and a small bit from Thunder Bay, or some days it'll be all from Thunder Bay. It's just what's happening.
So you say, okay, we're going to cover the best stories. So what makes it a best story?
Well, it's a story that matters to you, something that you're sitting in your kitchen getting ready to go to work, or you're in your car driving, and a story that you need to know about, whether it's breaking news, that's just making this up again, but say like a politician steps down. Well, that's the best story, the most important story, because that impacts a lot of people. If there's a road closure, on 1117, well, that's a top story, because thousands of people use that road every day. If it's an investigative or an enterprise piece done by one of our journalists that is an important story that could lead to change or could impact you as a consumer or you as a a motorist, well, that could be the best story of the day. It's what matters to you as a person and as a a listener or a reader of our website. So again, no exact science, but it's a story that we think will have the most impact to everybody.
And now, I had mentioned I listen to the radio regular, CBC, but I don't go online. Is it the same stories online on your website as it is on the radio, or are they different stories?
Different stories. I mean, for radio, obviously the treatment is usually a voice or a mix or a pack. But for digital, you can do a lot more. You can include video. You can do photography in terms of a slideshow of the subject, or and the story can be a little more fleshed out. So, I mean, the stories themselves. If you're going to talk to someone about their dog and why he does this cool trick, well, you might hear the story you heard on the radio, but you also might see a little more online. So it's a little more value added, I would say. But the stories are always different because people read and hear things differently. So they're never the exact same.
But just to clarify, so is it the same topic but dealt with in a different way, or totally different topics?
Depends. Usually, so. Just for example, if a reporter's working on a certain story, they'll do a treatment for radio and a treatment for the digital site. But if it's 2:00 in the afternoon and there's a road closure that may last an hour, well, that might just live on the digital site. We'll just we'll write a web story and then we'll publish that and then we'll put it on social media. But you may not hear it at 4:00 or 4:30 when the news comes back on because the story's over. So what digital platforms allow us to do is be more responsive to breaking news, allow us to be more responsive to things that may not have fit on radio. The radio is only a 2.5 hour morning program and 2 hours in the afternoon. So some things get more time on a digital platform.
And you mentioned digital platform. You mentioned website. What are the ways that people can access information through online?
Well, our website, cbc.ca/Thunder Bay, is where our news stories are put out throughout the day. So, any given day, there's multiple stories that are of different interest to people on there. But you'll also see us on, Instagram, which is a platform for, sharing pictures and things like that. Twitter, obviously, we're on Twitter, which is where people can aggregate and look at content. And then the big one, obviously, is Facebook. Facebook, I think a lot of people use. So we have our own Facebook page with thousands of people who like it, and they can find our web stories there usually, and as well as pictures and videos. So we try to use all the social media platforms along with our main website. So,
and do you have information about how many people you reach on a regular basis?
I'm not a good bean counter, so I can't actually give you any analytics of that sort of stuff. But our reach is far. As I said, we're an area the size of France, and anyone from around the world for that matter. So anyone can pick up our content. But in terms of exact numbers, I can't really. I don't know. I don't have an exact number for you.
So I'm wondering too. Now we talked about, in a way, the breaking news or interesting stories that are kind of happening now. But then there's other bigger issues in our society, and as a public broadcaster, you've shared that there's some responsibility here around our future. We're going to take a little break, and we'll come back to how do we look at some of those bigger issues?
Sure.
Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis. And my guest today is Michael Dick, the executive producer with CBC Thunder Bay. So Michael, just before the break, we're talking about how do you guys handle some of our bigger issues in society that aren't breaking news? We're just coming out of the federal election, and climate change was one of those big issues. There's all kinds of issues in our community, the challenges we have, community safety, reconciliation, climate change, accountability of our public dollars. Those bigger issues, how do you look at them? How do you see your role as a public broadcaster in terms of helping us understand those and really increasing our level of engagement with these challenging issues?
Well, it's you can't ignore things like elections and all that stuff, but it's really about, I think, giving perspective to things. There are a lot of issues, particularly here in Thunder Bay. I mean, no one denies there are issues of racism, and there are issues of jobs and roads and all those issues. But our job is to sort of take those issues and give perspective and give education to them. And so you look at an example of something like roads. Well, some of the things that we want to look at is how we're actually being funded. is that enough? And putting that question to people who matter, and being accountable and holding people accountable to, things that matter to all of us. So for us, it's really about, accountability, about education, and about making people aware and giving people perspective on those issues, because they are part of who we are. And as a public broadcaster, that's our role in some ways is to inform, but also to look at the issues that matter to all of us. So yeah, I mean, it's the fiber of sort of who we are.
What we see sometimes in society is certain groups or individuals get a lot of airtime, and others don't. People talk about a celebrity culture, and even in our society, there's oftentimes this belief these days that people that are successful are the ones that deserve to be successful, and they're the ones we should pay attention to. And the other ones that maybe aren't so successful. In our community, people low income, living in challenging lives, homeless folks, lots of times we don't see that as important, as a society, in a way. But you as a public broadcaster, or the organization, how do you balance these things? How do you approach them?
Well, you can't ignore that's our community, and as the public broadcaster, we're funded by the public, and so I don't think we're a celebrity. Like, we treat things as celebrity culture. I think we look for those issues and try to challenge some of the perceptions and the stereotypes, but also look at why those issues are the way they are. Just for example, like low income housing. That's a big issue that we've been covering locally here through things like doing Freedom of Information Act requests and finding out whether the funding levels in this region are where they should be, and holding the politicians accountable. One of the things about the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation is it is all of ours, and so whether your voice is what you might say as you said is a less marginalized group, their voices should be heard on the public broadcaster. So we were always trying to tell those stories. We're always trying to give voice to people who may not have a voice otherwise, and to put balance to those stories, and to make sure that they're accurate and that their voices are being heard. So yeah, I would say that maybe some other broadcasters might not do as much. Not saying do as much, but we are trying to give those voices to everybody on the airwaves.
So if folks that are watching the show now kind of go, geez, my experience with life doesn't seem to be reflected as much on our public broadcaster. How can they give you that feedback? What can they do?
Well, I mean, again, like anyone is free to write, to email the CBC, and to pitch stories, to the CBC. I can tell you on any given day, any given time, people come to us to pitch us stories or tell us about something that's happening in their community. Sometimes those stories don't lead themselves to being on the air or on the website, but a lot of times they do, because what's so great about the public is that people often have incredible stories, and they have stories that should be out there, and that should be told. And so sometimes we may not be able to see them, but if people bring them to us, we're definitely going to do our best to check out what they're telling us and to push it further. Again, like, this is the public broadcaster. This is I pay for it, you pay for it, we all pay for it. So if you've got a story, or if you have something that you think we need to know about, let us know.
And when you say people come and pitch a story to me or us, person who's never done that before, watching the show, what would that pitch look like? Like what do you need to hear, and how much time are you going to pay attention to that pitch?
Well, anybody who writes us or calls us or comes to the door, we give them the same time as anybody else. I mean, it's not like we shush people away. Sometimes people tell us, or people want to see as a story, doesn't happen in a day. For example, someone could have a story about, I'm making this up again, but like a crummy landlord, and it's not going to be tomorrow we're going to expose a crummy landlord. There's a lot of due diligence and a lot of journalism has to be done. You have to give balance and give accuracy to stories. So some things can happen in a day, some can happen in a month, but we never, me personally, never just say to somebody like, that's not a story. Don't waste our time, because we don't know everything. And we don't know every day what's happening in Red Lake, and we don't know every day what's happening in Dryden. So people, who come to us, we take everything very seriously, and we'll check out anything that's out there.
So if people want to get in touch, want to follow up and share their story or comment on what's going on, what's the best way to do that?
The best way would probably be emailing us, and that's Thunder Bay, all one word, at cbc.ca. That's an email account that all reporters, including myself as executive producer, we all see. And so if people email that account with a story tip or a suggestion, people see it. And I can tell you, sometimes what might seem like a really small idea can become something very big. So if you've got an idea about, and I'm making this up, but like a cat with a cool trick, or if you've got a story about a person in your community that's doing something really remarkable, let us know. We want to know those stories.
And we're going to end on that note. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and thanks for watching, and please stay safe, and we'll see you again next week.
Working together to make a better community. We can create a brighter day.